thank you very much, David, for those very thoughtful comments. I think coming back to my statement that the context for policy research and policy change is becoming more complicated, it's also good to be reminded that the capacity to address that is also growing. And so the question of how we put these things together is really what we're trying to understand better. So for our next speaker, we will turn to Simeon Ehui, who is the director. I always have to check, the positions change so quickly, but he's the director of agricultural global practice at the World Bank. Simeon, thank you very much for joining us.
Good afternoon. And I also want to thank, first of all, let me say hi to the staff of IFPRI and also to the board for being here. And it's always a pleasure to see also Peter around. I enjoyed working with him when he was at IFPRI and when I was at CGIAR. I mean, I've been in the World Bank for the past 15 years, but it's as if I've never left the CGIAR because of the continuing connection. And let me mention one thing also. Karen is also an alumni of the World Bank. It was not mentioned, and she was my manager for several years before coming to IFPRI. Let me say that I'm really excited to be here because it's an important topic that I care about at the World Bank. When I was in CGIAR, where I spent 15 years. First with IITA and then with the Ehui, and then with Ehui we built strong partnership with IFPRI. Within CGIAR, when I was at Ehui, I was also head of the policy, analysis program there. So I developed partnership with IFPRI for many years. One of my biggest frustration when I was in CGIAR was not being able to have big impact with the policymakers. I was quite, we're doing a lot of analysis, result, and then we're building partnership, but I was feeling not quite satiated with the impact of the work we're doing. When I came to the World Bank, I was hoping that, the impact of my work would even be bigger. I'm even more frustrated sometimes because, there's not sufficient infusion, of knowledge into what we are doing. And we do a lot of that, but in terms of the kind of knowledge that the policymakers are looking for that can make, a difference. This is why I think I really care about this particular conversation and seminar, and it's something that we need to continue doing. And I will come to that one at the end of my statement to talk about, my experience and how I think we can do. I have a few points to make. First of all, I think the situation is changing a lot, in developing countries, especially in Africa, because unlike South Asia or Asia, where we had this particular goal of making enough grain available for the consumers and having the green revolution and clear targeted policies, focused on subsidies, the price and credit, and then technologies. The situation is no longer the same today because of many factors that are emerging. We have conflict situation, we have fragility, we have climate change. We need to feed growing cities. There's the issue of jobs for the youth, and all these are challenges that we need to deal with at once every time we deal with the policy makers. And the question for us and for IFPRI, for the World Bank, is what are the kind of policies that we can actually work with the policymakers to have a change, a dent on these issues. So the situation is not the same as it is today as it was in the 70s. That's one fact that I think we need to keep in mind. Number two point that I want to make is that we have a lot of the transformation of the food systems shaped by the demand, shaped by value chain linkages, and technological change, which is moving very fast. For example, we talk about today about the mobile connectivity, and that is changing the landscape about how we do work in our countries. And the question for us is, what kind of policy environment that we need to be able to support, the government and policymakers to make a change and create the jobs. For example, we know the case of, for those who know Kenya, Kenya has been a leader in the mobile, technology, mobile money, this famous M-Pesa, for example, which is a well-established platform that offers retail financial services, to farmers. They have access to input suppliers, agronomists, and markets. And the question is, they were able to really make a change in that landscape because of simple changes in the regulatory, environment in Kenya to enable that to penetrate and make a change in it. So the question, for us is really what kind of support we can provide those kind of countries, and similar type of Kenya, in Africa, for example, that can make a change. Because it is a revolution that's taking place currently, and we need to move with that revolution. We can't stop it. So how can we make it better? And that's the kind of question that we need to be able to collectively try to answer. Now, coming to the question, I try to adhere to your TORs. So so you ask what are the key strengths of the policy program and how we can continue to see in the future. I think the examples given by Peter and Frank are quite good, because the example of the Ethiopian one is a very good one. I was actually in Ethiopia when that program was particularly established, and I knew that IFPRI had a particular connection with Mr. Gebre Newad, who used to be the advisor to the Prime Minister, now retired. But then IFPRI worked with the EDRI consistently to be able to really make the policy changes, and that led to the creation of the famous Agricultural Transformation Agency in Ethiopia, and that is making a change. And today, we're using that as an example of how policy changes have influenced and created an institution that's making a difference. And we're citing that case of Ethiopia as a very good example for other countries. And then Ethiopian case is a bit different in terms of the way the political system is organized, but at least it's a model of a policy change, a institutional change that's having an impact on the ground. And I think this is a very good model. Peter mentioned the example of India, with the Persis case, and thanks to IFPRI's analysis, the policy response were able to avert widespread, demonstration and get the policy reform, go through. Another example is the Malawi case on the subsidy work that IFPRI has done. A lot of us have read them, of a lot of the reports, and I'll come to that specifically, but when I go down about what the partnership can provide within the World Bank and IFPRI, because of the kind of work that IFPRI has done, the World Bank was in a position to provide $100 million development policy loan to Malawi recently, a few months ago. But then, for political electoral reasons, the policymaker decided to put a ban on the exports of maize in Malawi that was going to impact on the producers, because they wanted to really, we used this analysis that IFPRI, did, and bear with me, despite the fact that the country director for Malawi in charge wanted to move forward with that one, we were able to stop that loan and have further dialogue with them, and then they were able to reverse that policy in order to get access to the 100 million. That's the kind of impact that I think we need to be able to have. So it was informed by the analysis done that's having a big impact on policy decisions. These are the kind of things that we need to be able to do. The other question that, and in that context, I want to mention, for example, IFPRI has done a lot of work on subsidies, but I think a lot of work needs to continue. Today, globally, we're talking about 600 billion, in agricultural subsidies. And we talk about climate-smart agriculture. How can we efficiently use the subsidies, the money that's been spent, to really shift the emphasis to more, type of climate-smart type of investment that can have more longer-term impact? IFPRI has done some work on this kind of thing in India, in the past, in terms of analysis of the subsidies in some select countries. But I think more of that is needed. How can we shift the emphasis from from subsidies to more climate-smart type of investment? These are the kind of that I think we need to work on. And then the other point that I really want to mention, I mentioned earlier, I think IFPRI, it will be good if we can move in the space of the digitally enabled in agriculture and try to really look at, be present in the policy space for improving the regulatory environment, the policy environment, to make the adoption of those technologies faster, but actually to provide more information about how it's actually impacting, okay, on the smallholder farmers, the people that are out there that are, helpless and seeing those technologies coming, okay? So how can we make it that they can take advantage of the change that's happening? This analysis, I think, is needed and for policymakers. I want to mention specifically, and then David mentioned it, but at the World Bank, we have been seriously thinking about that. I say that I'm frustrated because, here we go, we work a lot with countries, we provide loan, investment, and then we don't have enough information to be able to, we do less in building capacities to live, if you want, with the ministers of agriculture or similar type of policymakers, enough capacity to do analysis and reflect on some of the key questions that they're having. This is why at the World Bank, together with the Gates Foundation and also AGRA, we've got a small trust fund to start thinking about that. We had a seminar not long ago, this month, yes, we're still in May, to be able to reflect on that and see how we can work together to make to build the capacity policy for countries. And I think the presence of IFPRI there is quite needed. One particular area that I think is critically important and where I would want to see more of the CGIAR IFPRI is what I mentioned earlier on this DPOs. It's a World Bank terminology for development policy operations or development policy loans. And more, our macroeconomists are not just looking at the big macro fiscal questions, they're also looking at sectoral questions. I can tell you that often we are at disadvantage of providing the kind of critical policy reforms that are needed to make a change. And if we get enough information or knowledge from research, evidence-based analysis on the kind of change that needs to be done, we can build, these reforms into the development policy loan and make a change, a big impact on the country. How to do that is a big challenge. And I know with Karen, we have talked about how can we do that. Because of the different model, the way we are working, but we need to continue this conversation. How can we make that sure that we can actually bring institutions like IFPRI on board in our dialogue continuously, and then so that they can actually help us to define critical, high-level, essential policy questions that can make a difference on the ground. That's what the policymakers are looking for. It's not just the research that improves the result, but how can you change, the situation on the ground? Because, believe me, the policymakers they want to also save money. They want to save resources. And the Minister of Finance is interested to see how the resources can be used effectively. They are not just against agriculture. They don't have sufficient information about how they can use the money. Anyway, I've passed my time, but I'm excited about this, and I can continue on and on. But I look forward to working with IFPRI to see how we can do that. And Karen changed that as of July 1. I have a new title at the World Bank, keep changing. So I will be the regional director for Africa for agriculture, environment, social, water, and urban. So we can work together.